Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Well, good morning. I can't believe what a punctual group this is. I hope you didn't come expecting the cornstalk rock bands to be here. I can't quite live up to that level of noise, at least. Boy, I'm impressed with the nice weather. I thought maybe people would be staying outside today instead of coming into the auditorium. So I'm glad to see you all here. I'll talk a tiny bit about the two careers I've had, and then, of course, we'll spend most of our time answering whatever questions the students have. You know, I feel incredibly lucky that I've had both my career at Microsoft and now my full-time work at the foundation, where I get to work on super interesting problems and have a real sense of progress, that the innovative work that was backed in both places really is making a difference. For Microsoft, it was about the magic of software. A number of people were doing great work in hardware, the miracle of the microprocessor, the optic fiber, disk storage. And what my friend Paul Allen and I got to see was that the key that would unlock all of that, take advantage of it, create a market for it, would be having incredible software. And not just software from us, but a whole software industry that would create solutions and ideally do that on a kind of high volume, low price basis so that computing would move from being a tool of just a few large corporations in the government to literally a tool for every individual and become the thing that would allow us to create and communicate and analyze in a way that never would have been possible before. Really something to multiply our capabilities. And the personal computer connected up to the internet really has become that tool. You know, from the early days when it was just a machine that hardly could do anything at all, and even the computer companies of the day ridiculed it, you know, saw it as something that was just a few hobbyists messing around. It's become something that we almost take for granted. You know, rich documents, you know, nice typeface things that you can create that, you know, would have required lots and lots of money in the past. You know, those are the basic tools that many of you have grown up with and will be able to take to the next level. That digital revolution is in no sense at an end. Whether we think about the way we're going to interact with speech and pen and vision, robots that are under software control, if we think about taking that digital technology and what it can mean in education, in health, in modeling the various sciences to understand tough problems in energy and material science or biology, we are really just at the very beginning. Now for myself, as I got into my late 40s and 50s and I'd seen the kind of needs in the world, and I was lucky enough to have the resources that Microsoft provided, I decided to focus more on giving away than making money. And so I've gotten a chance to travel the world, be out in Africa and Asia quite a bit, and see the needs that are out there. And now our foundation is very focused on global health, focused on agriculture, because the majority of the very poor in the world are farmers who have very small plots of land. So any increase in productivity or certainty of their crop coming in can make a huge difference for them. And you might think of a career in software, you know, selling to people who can afford personal computers, and now the career at the foundation is being very different. And certainly they're different in the sense that now it's about vaccines. Now a lot it's with various governments, the donor governments, the governments in poor countries. But at its core, it's really basically the same thing, which is finding innovators, people who've got breakthrough ideas, being willing to back them, understand what they're working on, measure what they're coming up with, try and make sure that when it's delivered it really has the impact it's supposed to be, and getting into a feedback loop driven by very precise measurement. And so I view all the things that I learned at Microsoft as really just preparing me as well as providing the resources to do the work that I do now. It's a great pleasure to be here. There's a lot of amazing people who've helped out Microsoft that work, including a lot that work in Fargo. There's a lot of great traditions of Concordia and the other schools here about getting students out into the world to understand what's going on. I'm excited to be here on the weekend that we're dedicating this Offutt Business School that I think will be a great new asset for the college. I'm glad that you've got programs where you send kids off to places like India to learn new things, and you've got corporate sponsors for that. I understand you've got some students who are working on raising money for the meningitis vaccine, which is an incredibly worthy thing. I've actually been and seen in the meningitis belt in Africa the kids who got that disease before the vaccine had come along, and now seen that in many of those areas that disease is being wiped out because the vaccine is becoming more and more available. So I think the opportunity for innovation for all of you as you go out and pick your careers in the years ahead are probably greater than ever. But having your eyes open to the great needs of the world, including the needs of the poorest, I think will help you pick the thing that's most fulfilling for you. And so I'm excited to be here today and answer any of these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. You talked about the magic of software, and we're sitting here at a residential liberal arts college, and we like to think of the learning that students experience here as informational and also relational, the kind of mentoring and guidance that students receive, and also experiential, what you were just alluding to, where students are engaged in extended research projects and other kinds of work in the world. What do you see as the relationship between the magic of software and the way that undergraduates learn now and the way that they may be learning in the future?
Well, certainly I envy kids growing up today. You know, when I was young, I had to read the World Book sort of alphabetically. And it didn't have any videos you could click on, and it was, you know, it's weird to learn things alphabetically. It's kind of hard to create quite the same framework as you can with all these great online materials. And so I think the empowerment now, you know, the opportunity to see what's going on, whether it's in fields of science or in places that are far away, including those most in need, it's never been so great. It's a wonderful time to be a student. Now, software, in terms of letting us simulate things, whether it's scientific phenomena or social phenomena, it's getting better and better. And so I think almost any major that you have nowadays, understanding, you know, what software, how it's going to change those activities, is a key part of being at the cutting edge.
Thank you. One of the best parts about this gathering this morning is the opportunity for Bill to be in dialogue with our students. And so I'm going to turn to Allie to ask the first question.
Good morning, Mr. Gates. My name is Allie Kafka. I'm a healthcare management and Spanish student here at Concordia. The key goal of our core curriculum here is to brew, which is becoming responsibly engaged in the world. In your opinion, what are the most critical issues in the world today that students should address?
Well, I think there's quite a diversity of problems in the world today. I'll list a few that I think are maybe the most important. I think the awareness of the great divide between the rich and the poor, and how, if we're not careful, that divide is just going to grow and grow, whether it's on a country-by-country basis or even within a country where you've got very poor people. If you're in a poor country, you're often in a bit of a trap. That is, the health is very poor, the infrastructure is very poor, the stability is quite low, the nutrition is poor. In Africa, about 30 to 40% of the kids never fully develop their brain functions because they've been subject to health challenges. And so making sure that, because they're geographically in a different place from the rich, making sure that they're not left behind, whether it's purely for a humanitarian reason or even in terms of thinking about stability in the world. So, paying attention to the poorest. I think we have a big challenge in terms of how our energy economy works, that over time we're going to have some way that we're not pushing global warming. And that's a challenge because it's many decades away, and the degree of difficulty it causes is actually fairly uncertain. But even so, there's a lot that needs to be done now, particularly in innovation, to build low-cost tools, that it'd be easy to not do that work because we're too focused on the short term and not planning for that. Finally, I'd say in areas like healthcare, we have a model in the United States that's kind of an unaffordable model. And so, figuring out how we're going to meet the promise of making state-of-the-art medical care available to everybody without completely either bankrupting the government or taking other government functions like education and defunding those in a way that's a real problem for the future of our country, both in absolute and compared to others. And I'd highlight those three as ones that, it's going to take all the ingenuity that all of you have to figure out the solutions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Philip.
Hi, Mr. Gates. I'm Philip Camella, and I'm a biology student here at Concordia College. Concordia, along with 2 other local institutions, have developed the nation's first undergraduate vaccinology degree. I'm going to be the first student from Concordia to obtain that degree. I was wondering if you could speak along the lines of the importance of vaccines and some of the challenges that come about with this particular field.
Well, vaccines I can't say enough good things about. They're really the miracle technology. If you take the health field as a whole, it spends less than 2% of its money on vaccines, but close to 50% of the medical benefits you get from having a health system come from vaccines. A kind of extreme example of that is smallpox. This was a disease that was killing over 2 million children every year, and counted actually for about 10% of all childhood deaths. Because a smallpox vaccine was created and it was delivered out to everybody in this very intense eradication campaign, that became the first disease that was ever eliminated altogether. It was certified as gone in 1979, and we haven't had to have anybody get smallpox since then. Right now, in fact, this week, I just came back from a 2-day conference in the Middle East where we were raising the money to eradicate polio, which will become, within the next 6 years, the second disease ever to be eradicated. So we raised $4 billion of the $5.5 billion we need to get that done. So vaccines, whether it's measles or diarrhea or pneumonia, getting them out to all the children in the world, and then inventing some new ones. We don't yet have a vaccine for things like malaria or tuberculosis. I understand there's some work here on a hookworm vaccine, which is a fantastic thing. Hookworm is a real problem, not so much in terms of deaths, but in terms of this nutrition thing I was talking about, where it drains your capacity. And so as a student, you're really not able to benefit from being in school if you have the burden of hookworm, which is super prevalent in many of these poor countries. So immunology, understanding the immune system, and then figuring out how vaccines can make the immune system respond in such a way that you get lifelong protection, that's the way that we're going to eventually eradicate malaria and HIV and TB and all these different diseases. And so we put our foundation over $1 billion a year into vaccine research. And it's a very exciting time because, partly because of diseases like HIV, there's some great fundamental research that's gone on that helps us understand a lot better what we need to do to make these new vaccines.
Thank you. Bill, I'm wondering, as we wait for our next student questioner, with the Gates Foundation, how do you come to decisions about where to help and how to help, the kind of help that you ought to provide and what your partners ought to be for these incredibly complicated and global challenges?
Yeah, it's a great question. Melinda and I picked two things to focus on. One is, for the United States, we decided education was the key to the strength of the country and its ability to deliver on its promise of equity. And so about a quarter of what we do, about $1 billion a year, goes to that. And then the balance, we said, would go to help the poorest, the 75%. And there we looked and saw, okay, what could really change their condition? And we saw that healthcare was primary, that those parents care about their children living and growing up in a healthy way as much as all parents in the world, and yet very little had been done. In fact, we found that we had lots of ways that spending less than $1,500 we could save a life. That is, by inventing a vaccine or getting a vaccine out there. And so those lives are being treated right now as being worth less than $1,500. And that was kind of stunning to me. I thought when I came to philanthropy that all the really good stuff, all the really high impact stuff, somebody would have done. And we would just get to do the next marginal thing, which wouldn't even be that amazing. Kind of unfortunately for the world, some of these great opportunities weren't being worked on. When we first gave $40 million to malaria, which was 10% of the amount being spent on baldness drug, we became the world's biggest funder of malaria.
It's too late for me.
Yeah. One of the great medical stories is that the way we deal with worms, other than hookworm right now, is actually that a drug was invented for American dogs, rich dogs. And somebody just said, well, let's try it on the humans in Africa. It happened to work perfectly. And then it was donated, which is a fantastic thing. But it never would have, ivermectin never would have been created except that these rich dogs needed to be dewormed. And so the priorities we have when they're driven by the market, they're 95% right. And that's a wonderful thing. But it does miss something like malaria because those consumers have no voice because they have no money. And so the priorities, the resources don't go for these things. And so we found what you call extreme low-hanging fruit in terms of all the things that kill children. So our metric that we say, did we have a good year or not, our metric is how much did we reduce the number of children who died. And in the year I was born, it was over 20 million. A couple of years ago, last year it's been measured, it was 6.9 million. So we've gone from 25% of all children under 5 dying as recently as 1960 to now it's under 6%. And if we in 15 years don't get that down to 2%, then we're not doing our job. That can be done.
Thank you. Thank you. Like to call on Yi-Wei for our next student question.
Good morning, Mr. Gates. I am Yi-Wei from China, and I am a finance student at Concordia. For any organization to survive over the long term, it needs a sustainable financial basis. So how does the foundation balance the passion of the social purpose organization with the needs for fiscal responsibility?
Well, you're absolutely right that the private sector has a certain discipline that comes from wanting to stay alive. And if a company's not using resources well, then people don't buy their products, and eventually they don't get to tie up society's resource. That company will disappear. And so the private sector, is amazing. We don't have government discussions about are there enough Thai restaurants or Chinese restaurants. We just let the marketplace decide. What kind of cars should be built. The marketplace decides all these amazing complex things that the marketplace is so good at. And you can compare, economies that are market-driven versus economies that are not. For example, in the case of China, how the economy was managed up till about 1980. And then, with the same human resources, how it was managed from 1980 till today, courtesy to some degree of Deng Xiaoping's leadership of being willing to let the market shape not only agriculture, but all those different activities. It's amazing. And so philanthropy is dangerous because we don't have that same life-threatening problem of, okay, nobody's buying this stuff, we better make it better. And so philanthropy a lot of it is not good thinking. It's kind of hopeful thinking. It may or may not have that impact. That's okay. What the sector has to do in return for having that limitation is it has to be willing to take on very aggressive, risky things. It has to pick the things that the market won't do for some reason and the government won't do for some reason. Of the three sectors, philanthropy is by far the smallest. Yeah. And so it has to be about really new and different things, like Rockefeller Foundation's funding of the Green Revolution, which nobody really thought that would work. They funded Norman Borlaug to go down, and more people are alive today because of those breakthroughs than any other scientific innovation other than vaccines. And so it's a sector that really has to think about its uniqueness and be a bit tougher on measurement than it often is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that we have a recorded question now from Jessica.
Mr. Gates, my name is Jess Roscoe, and I'm a Communications and Global Studies student at Concordia, but I'm currently studying abroad in Tanzania. My question for you is this. From your assessment, what critical innovations are needed in East Africa in order to create sustainable farm productivity and growth?
In order to create
sustainable farming.
Yeah, if you look at agricultural productivity in Africa, it's about 1/6, per hectare of the United States or Europe or China. And if you look at those three regions over the last 50 years, they've all gone through a dramatic change in productivity, over a factor of 2 in productivity. And Africa, on the other hand, has stayed essentially flat. In fact, some areas, because of depleted soils, are actually less productive today than they were in the past. And so it's a bit of a trap. If you have low productivity, then your ability to invest, say, in fertilizer or better seeds or irrigation type infrastructure, or even to learn the agronomic practices that might let you do multi-cropping or do more cash crops and then be able to buy your staple crops with the cash you receive from that, you're very much stuck into this subsistence mode. And the lack of infrastructure, roads, basically mean that all of your inputs are way more expensive. The seeds, the herbicides, anything you're going to use cost you a lot more than farmers elsewhere in the world. Fertilizer is about 50% more expensive, and that, of course, is a very significant cost. You don't have hybrid seed infrastructure, so you give up the productivity you would get there. The crops in Africa are often orphan crops, sorghum, millet, cassava. They're not the percentage that are the big three, rice, maize, wheat, is fairly small, and their weather conditions are different enough that they haven't been able to use those main varieties. Now, this can all be solved. Some fixed costs of investment in getting the right seeds to them and getting the right extension system to them, a little bit of infrastructure, and you can raise African productivity. We've had an experiment in Ethiopia where they opened up the seed market and we funded a bunch of new seed companies, and they've seen a 50% agricultural productivity improvement over 5 years, which is quite phenomenal. Particularly when you're at subsistence, you go up 50%. That really changes your ability to afford the school fees and things that can uplift your family and make a huge difference. So we need to intensify the work. Now, climate change is going to affect tropical regions more than any other part of the world. So you have this irony that the people who did the least to cause the problem are the ones who are going to suffer by far the most, because they don't have buffer stocks, and a bad year really means not having enough to eat for them, particularly for their children. So things like drought resistance traits, using various techniques, including genetic techniques to create the better seeds, are absolutely needed for Africa to achieve these levels of productivity with the kind of weather change that are working against them.
Let me ask a quick follow-up to Jessica's question. You talked about the barrier of resources, you talked about weather and climate. How important is it when you're engaged with an area like the one that you were describing to work with people who know the culture, who know, what life is like, in a particular place as it's been lived for a long, long time? Is it mainly a matter of importing the technology that we know? What's the relationship there?
Well, often they're using local varieties, and if that's what they're eating, that's what they're used to, and they're comfortable with their practices. And so you have to find what's the trust network to let them be willing to experiment and try different things. And actually, one of the most amazing things came out of a group in India we'd worked with, where instead of Extension being an expert showing up onto the farm, they created a thing called Digital Green, where they went out with a video camera and asked local farmers who were getting high productivity to talk about what they were doing. And then they went back, edited it, created a DVD with lots of local farmers speaking the local dialect, with photos of what was going on, and then took that out and got farmers groups to come together and see that. And they got, per dollar invested, 4 times better adoption than the classic Indian Extension service, where some person who knows more but isn't trusted, may not even speak the local dialect, is coming in and talking to them. So there's a lot of social innovation required if you want to change these practices. One of the best adopted crops we've ever had is a rice that rice normally, when it gets submerged, if you have a lot of rain, will die off, so that when the water goes away, you get no crop. So there's just one gene that you can put in that makes it stay there, and then when the water goes away, you get your full yield. That one is so vivid that people could see it, and so we've gotten 1 million farmers in India alone. 1 million. That's a lot of farmers. Now, their farms aren't as big as around here, but to adopt this new variety. And so a little bit when we think of our product profiles, thinking about how we can make it so strong that they can actually see the differences is part of it as well. So it's definitely, we have a lot of good seeds that we wonder why they're not using, because we haven't created these mechanisms to make it clear and work with them to make a transition.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's turn to our next student question, which is from Beth.
Good morning, Mr. Gates. My name is Beth Osmond. I'm studying accounting here at Concordia. My question for you is, in 2010, you and your wife joined Warren Buffett in creating the Giving Pledge, which encourages the country's wealthiest to donate to charitable causes. The Giving Pledge is thought to have more of a moral contract rather than a legal one. Do you believe that this will enhance the impact the the pledge will have?
One thing that's phenomenal is that philanthropy in the United States is more widespread than in any other country. And that's not just about rich people, the Carnegies and Rockefellers. That's about the entire country. Across the country as a whole, about 2% of all income is given every year. So about $300 billion a year. Now, some of that's religious giving, about 25%, but 75% goes into other causes as well. And it's kind of amazing, if you look at it state by state, it's almost 2% everywhere. Utah's 5%. So they really do follow the dictates of tithing. At least half the state, on average, seems to be living up to that. And the level of philanthropy, and not just financial, although that's part of it, the amount of volunteering, the number of nonprofit organizations in the U.S. is way greater than in any other country. And it's a real strength that people are willing to say, yes, the government is supposed to do a lot of things, but we as citizens can organize and look at local conditions, go to local businesses, and do services that are on top of that are complementary to what the government can do. And so it's an envy of every other country in the world. They're trying to figure out how they get these things to happen. The idea of the Giving Pledge was to get together people who were already doing philanthropy. So the first few dinners we had were just to sit and listen to the stories of George Soros or Chuck Feeney or David Rockefeller, who are really innovative philanthropists, and use that to inspire and teach us what they were thinking about. That's why we did the dinners to start with. Then the dinners got to people who were thinking about philanthropy but not that involved, and they were saying, well, could we create a group that would get together? And I didn't want to have something where just everybody would get together. I wanted people to have some skin in the game. And so we said, well, what about a pledge? You know, what should the number be? And some people said it should be a third. Some people said it should be 90%. But it was nice to say the majority of your wealth. And so now, as was said, we have 105 people. We just started including people from outside the United States. But it's very much, it's been a huge success of people to get together. And we're really trying to encourage people to be a bit more risk-taking. We're encouraging them not to do it as much through their will, to get involved younger and use when they're vibrant and the skills they have from however they made the resources are still very much intact. So, you know, younger, working more with each other, and taking on tougher problems. And it's hard to measure, but I think we really are starting to have that effect. And I think it'll affect generations in the future to really almost think of this as a standard practice.
Thank you. Thank you. How does the habit of philanthropy get cultivated? I mean, you were talking about the fact that the United States, that there's a higher percentage of giving across the nation, I assume over a fairly long period of time. But how does that happen? And what should be done so that we can continue to cultivate that habit, not only among those of very great resources, but the rest of us?
Yeah, when you listen to the stories of the people who are doing large-scale philanthropy, it's always amazing how much their parents' example comes up. That they had a parent who, even with very modest means, was setting aside some portion and were spending significant time volunteering, you know, creating these organizations or making them work. And that the person who had the big success really felt like it was incumbent upon them that, you know, their parents, even if they aren't around, are sort of looking down and seeing, okay, are you fulfilling what our family values are? And so I think it's pretty important to get people at a young age, you know, volunteering, seeing different of these organizations. I've been very involved in United Way over the years because it, in terms of your local social service organizations, is quite phenomenal. And getting them to work together, seeing the needs. You know, anybody who wants to go out and see what's happening and see which ones really appeal to them. United Way has been phenomenal at performing that. And I'd say it's partly how I got inculcated into philanthropy, as my parents were very involved in United Way and would even come home and talk about how that money was allocated and the different causes that they had to make choices between.
Thank you. Let's go to our next student question. It's from Matt.
Hi there, Mr. Gates. My name is Matt Gantz, and I'm studying finance and writing here. And I understand that you are a very big proponent of education reform, most notably with respect to instructor evaluation recently. And so with that in mind, what do you believe are the key initiatives that we must undertake to advance the field of academics?
Well, the U.S. education system for a long time was the envy of the world. And particularly in the K through 12 area, we've now fallen behind. That is, the number of dropouts we have are greater than most other countries that have the same level of success that we have. And if you benchmark reading skills, math skills, the U.S. has gone from being very much in the top to being below average. And so if you look and say, okay, what are these other people doing? Are they spending more money? The answer is no. We spend by far the most money, no matter how you benchmark it as a percentage of the economy or anything else. Is it student-teacher ratio? No, we're doing better on that than these others. One of the key differences is that they have a very strong personnel system that gives feedback to teachers. And so they invest in having other teachers sit in the classroom or training the principals. They actually have career ladders where at an early stage As a teacher, you are given a lot of guidance, and then if you achieve a certain level of skill, you move up, and they have 3 or 4 different levels that teachers work at. So they have mentor teachers, master teachers. And so our system has fallen into a mode where teachers basically get no feedback. They get told whether they showed up, but 98% of them are marked satisfactory, not better or worse than that, and particularly not in terms of their practice of how do you calm the class down or make things interesting to different types of students. And so I think it's important that we build that feedback system. Now, exactly how you do that, how much you connect that up to the PACE system, we need experimentation, and we can look at these other countries that have done it. There is a move afoot to do some of this, but whether the investment levels be enough to make it high quality, and whether there'll be kind of high stakes that overuse the test scores for this stuff and will sort of hurt its reputation, it's hard to say at this point. But I'd say it's giving more feedback to teachers would be the very first thing that would get us back up to being one of the best in the world.
Thank you. We had a little bit of chat before we came out here to sit together about the question of whether what we need to do in K through 12 is the same or in some ways different. If Matt had asked you the question about higher education, what would your answer have been?
Well, the U.S.'s position in higher education relative to the rest of the world is still quite strong. There's only a few things we're worse in. Kids drop out of higher education more. Higher education is less affordable relative to average salary level in the U.S. than it is in many countries. And there's a concern that the rigor, the amount of hours that students spend, has dropped down quite a bit over time and doesn't compare favorably to others. On the other hand, the quality of the top institutions are much better than other countries. If you take the top 20 or top 100, the U.S. would be 60% of either of those lists, done on a very objective basis. And of course, you see that with the international demand to come to these schools. A lot of schools could, if they chose, fill their roles up with full tuition international students if they wanted to do that, which most feel that wouldn't fulfill their mission. So we need to renew our strength. We're not as far behind as we are in K through 12. We need to put rigor back in the system, and then we need to look at affordability, including whether or not technology can come in and help make things more affordable. Now, there's a lot of excitement about this. There's these massively online open courses, MOOCs, that various people are doing. There's still, and our foundation is the biggest funder of those, there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of how you fit that into the curriculum. It's clear that for the average student, just saying it's all online doesn't work. That the engagement, discussion, hands-on nature of the study, you at least have to be hybrid so that you can take lectures and put those online, but other things like study groups, until the digital technology gets a lot better, face-to-face is far superior, particularly for the student who's not hyper-motivated. If a student's hyper-motivated, really, if they're truly motivated, you just hand them the textbook and say, okay, go read it. You don't need a college or anything. Colleges don't know secrets where it's like, oh, you had to go there to learn, F equals MA. It's in the textbook. And if you want to read, Feynman's lectures on physics, then you're a very unusually motivated student. So it's very clear we need to be willing to change and try new things, building on what is a very, very strong system for higher ed.
Thank you. Let me say in this public setting that all of Concordia students are hyper-motivated. But one of the things what is interesting to see is the way in which some of my colleagues have begun to reverse engineer their courses so that what used to be done in a lecture fashion is available in an online form so that the time that would have been spent in class hearing a lecture is spent in problem solving and an experiment rather than that. And I do believe that there are some students who are excited about physics. And so I'm happy to call on Kudzai for our next student question.
Good morning, Mr. Gates. My name is Kudzai Katema, and I'm studying physics and chemistry here at Concordia. I'm originally from Zimbabwe. As a young man from Africa pursuing a non-business major, what message do you have for students like me about our obligation to create sustainable business developments to the world's most persistent problems?
Well, certainly the sciences have been a source of really profound innovation. The sciences broadly defined: biology, chemistry, physics, engineering, and they'll continue to be. It's an amazing time to be in the sciences. We, through various simulation techniques, will really understand materials. We'll really understand chemical reactions, including catalysts. We'll really understand genetics, not just human genetics, but also plant genetics. I mean, the amount we don't know about plant genetics is pretty mind-blowing. Even characteristics like disease resistance, or how they think about when they're willing to grow versus not grow. And as we optimize these things that we understand, the opportunity for increased capability is really amazing. For Zimbabwe, it's great land. The government policies have not been perfect in the last, say, decade to take advantage of that. It was a breadbasket more than feeding itself and exporting. Hopefully, as those policies come around politically, it can go back to being that with even higher levels of productivity in the past. That area, South Africa, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, even parts of Zambia, should have the same type of productivity that you've got in this area here, which is quite phenomenal. So a combination of science and policy work together there can make it utterly different than it's been in the last decade.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me call on Syed for our next student question.
Mr. Gates, my name is Syed Kashif Ali Shah, and I'm psychology major. I'm actually cultural ambassador of Pakistan in the United States. As you seek to eradicate polio, healthcare workers have been targeted in Pakistan and Afghanistan. How can you achieve the goal of ending polio and other health initiatives while such attacks happen?
Now, that's a very good question. So we mentioned that polio is down to only 3 countries, and the 3 are Nigeria, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And as you'd expect, the last 3 are the hardest 3, because all the other ones got done. People expected India to be the hardest. India has 27 million kids born every year. Kids move around a lot. It has a lot of reasons it should have been the last country. But 2 years ago, we had our last case. Now, it could get reinfected, which is why we need to double down and get finished with these other 3 countries. As you said, in Pakistan, also in Afghanistan, Nigeria, there have been terrible rumors against the vaccine, saying that it's unclean, haroon, that it sterilizes women, and so various elements, Taliban-related elements, have actually gone out last November, and they killed 9 of the vaccine workers. They killed 1 in February. They killed 1 in March, and it's a combination of things that make them not trust what the government's doing, particularly the polio campaign. Now, back in the smallpox days, they did what were called days of tranquility, where everybody would lay down their weapons, they'd let the vaccinators come in and do their job. And so we're trying to do that. Aga Khan University, Red Cross, various religious leaders are trying to get word out so that people say, this is not the thing to go after. So the vaccine really is a good thing. That's the truth. It's how do you get the word out? In Nigeria, it's a group called Boko Haram that's gone and killed a lot of the vaccinators. And so particularly after this week's conference that showed we're on track to raise the money, which could have been a problem, but looks like it'll be okay, the only thing that would prevent us from succeeding is this violence, the misunderstanding that eventually we won't get people to volunteer to come and do the vaccination because they're so much at risk. So far, all the parties in Pakistan have committed that they're committed to keep going, and the campaigns have continued so far. You know, we've got an election coming up that could be a bit tumultuous. We've got that in Afghanistan, and in a year we have that in Nigeria as well. So at this conference, we had a lot of great people coming down from Pakistan to talk to us, give us advice about how we run the campaign.
Thank you. Let's turn to Rachel for our next question.
Good morning, Mr. Gates. My name is Rachel Suchi, and I'm majoring in international business and Spanish. So we've all heard stories about wealthy individuals whose wealth has had negative consequences on their personal lives. So my question for you is, how do you manage to stay grounded while being extremely successful in your career?
Well, as far as I can tell, it's had no negative effect on me. It's a biased point of view. You know, I think success is always a bit dangerous. You know, and you can think that whatever your success was because, you know, you are magically gifted in understanding things. Whereas, of course, any success, particularly a gigantic success, is a huge number of factors, including hard work and understanding, but timing, you know, other people who came to work with you, other people who might have done the same thing who somehow messed up in doing it. And so often you'll have too much confidence about what you understand. You know, in science, as Feynman said, the easiest person to fool is yourself. And so you have to force yourself to go through, you know, again and again and think through, is this the right thing to be doing? You know, will this work? Am I doing it because it would be exciting if it succeeded? Am I really looking at these factors? In fact, in polio, several times we had to say to ourselves, was it time to give up? Or really, did we think there was a prospect of being able to move forward? You know, I think great wealth is particularly challenging when you're raising a family because, you know, your children may be treated differently. They may have an expectation. Melinda and I have told our children from the beginning that, you know, only a tiny fraction of the wealth will come to them, so that they'll have to go out and have their own career and, you know, find their own way without just having it all taken care of. You know, I hope that works. At least that's the way we've chosen to do it. So, yes, it can have negatives. I think there are societies like China that are still thinking about how do they feel about great wealth? You know, are those people okay or not okay? And partly, I think the way a society gets used to it is if there is a huge amount of philanthropy where that money's going back to those most in need. I think it's a very, you know, positive mechanism, although it should be voluntary in nature. I think without that, you know, China may get into a very schizophrenic view towards what capitalism leads to, which is that some people end up with a lot of wealth. And so I do think philanthropy has a lot of benefits, and, you know, certainly if we can work with each other, we'll be a little less misled by you know, the fact that people you give money to are always telling you what a brilliant thing it was to give them money. It's hard to avoid that bias effect.
That's a short description of the work of a college president.
Yeah. Yeah. Which donors have you told they didn't do a good job giving you money?
Very few. Thank you. Thank you. I wonder if I could build on Rachel's question to ask you to go back to something that you had mentioned before, which was I guess you would say, the kind of turn in your primary focus from software to the work of the Gates Foundation. Would you talk a little bit more about what led you with others to make that turn in focus?
Well, in my 20s and 30s, I was fanatical about software. You know, I didn't believe in vacations, didn't believe in weekends, I was focused on software day and night. I knew everybody's license plate. I knew when they came into the parking lot, when they left. I knew every line of code. And I enjoyed being a fanatic. And I was really focused on Microsoft doing great software and, learning from our mistakes and hiring the best people. I knew that was a job that was so intense that as I got certainly into my late 40s and 50s, that I couldn't do it in the same way. And that, in fact, because of the constant revolution in that space, that having somebody younger making the architectural decisions would make sense at some point. And so that I would need to go do something else, so I wouldn't just be around second-guessing this fresher leader in doing those things. And I always thought it would have something to do with philanthropy and innovation, because I always like research and innovation. I like the opportunity to learn a lot of sciences. So I had a vague understanding of that. I was 38 when I got married, and then we had the kids, and that became a major focus. But by my early 50s, I really felt that it was time. We'd been giving money enough that I was seeing on a part-time basis what was missing in vaccines, and that the world was not very organized to get stuff done. In nutrition, totally disorganized. That aid money was not done in a business-like fashion, and that there were examples of success, but they weren't, copied and carried forward in the right way. So I thought, wow, this is almost like software was before I got into it, which is no real sense of what it should become. And, then I had to pick. I talked to Steve Ballmer 4 years before I made the transition, and we did a public announcement 2 years before I made the transition. So then in 2008, I made that change. Coincidentally, about that time, Warren Buffett, because of his wife passing away, chose that the majority of his wealth would go into the foundation. And so we were doubling in size right about as I was coming in full time. So it's worked in a kind of amazing way, and particularly because it was already going with several hundred people and some programs, it had a kind of scale that, and I thought about it part-time, that I could jump in full-time and find it every bit as fulfilling as the work I'd done at Microsoft. Now, I do take vacations now. I do take some weekends off, and so I'm I like to think of myself fanatic, but I'm not a true fanatic like I used to be.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me call on Frederick for our next question.
Mr. Gates, my name is Frederick Noring, and I'm studying computer science and math here at Concordia. How do you think technology, and software in particular, can help enhance the success of global initiatives such as those undertaken by your foundation?
Well, one thing we ought to be able to do, but I wouldn't give us a high grade for yet, is we ought to be able to take these things that are far away and make them more evident to people here. If malaria was on your block, if as you walk to work, you say, oh, that child is about to die because they don't have drugs or a bed net, normal human charity would make sure that we took care of these things. And so it's a real problem that the poor are clustered together out of sight, and the rich are clustered together, sort of thinking, oh, everybody must be living like we are, and therefore you don't get resources moved in a way that would promote any degree of equity. And so online, could be a way to do it. But so far, it's such a light touch. Yes, people go and watch videos, but if you compare it, say, to the students who went down and volunteered to desegregate schools, where they went down, spent a year, put their life at risk, you don't have that level of engagement online. So the amount of money, for example, that's been raised online is really quite modest, very small. So awareness is still a challenge that's in front of us. Certainly these digital tools are critical for the advance of the science. For example, genomic information goes up online, and then people all over the world can see it. And I have a meeting all day Monday. We're going to talk through what should the website for malaria genomic data look like? What are the software tools? How do we get people to publish and annotate so that we can make sure the progress goes as fast as possible? And it's a very deep database software type problem of what should disease and plant specialization do to use genomic information. And so software is the very tool of these activities. I built a group to do disease simulation because, for example, for malaria eradication, or we're using it for polio as well, you want to understand what tools give you a chance to get rid of malaria. If you're trying to do a disease eradication and you get 99% of the way there, but you fail, you waste a lot of money, a lot of credibility. And so the idea of using the software tools, it's actually a physics simulation technique, Monte Carlo simulation, that is used, but it's very complex to do. We've created a group there. And so that only when that software really shows us will we go and declare, put the world's credibility behind malaria eradication, which we hope in 3 or 4 years we're at that stage. So I think software is into the kind of communications, it's into the discovery. Now when you get out into the field itself, for example, using cell phones to inform farmers or keep health records, that is something there's a lot of optimism about, but it's still proven very difficult. The network coverage, network reliability, worker training, size of the screens. Over the next decade, a lot of that will come into play, but 90% of the projects that have been tried really haven't thought through the very tough conditions and all the constraints that exist in order for digital technology at the point of delivery to have an impact. So it'll happen, but we need to be realistic about the fact that it's not in prime time yet.
Thank you. We have a little more time, I'm glad to say, and so let me ask if there are students here who haven't had an opportunity to ask a question who would like to do so. Yes.
Hi, Mr. Gates. My name is Ian. I'm an accounting student here, majoring in accounting and Spanish, and obviously. My big question as I move forward, I'm graduating this year, has to do with ethics, and I was wondering a time that you were faced with an ethical dilemma and who you sought out to help you solve that problem.
Well, I have to say the foundation work does get us into a lot of ethical type issues. Medical trials. You often have the case where you like to discover information that might help millions, and yet, the goal is not to harm a single individual while you do that. And so a very complex set of procedures have been created for doing medical trials that often have held things back, sometimes because the bar that's set is too difficult. And, it's good to err on that side, but it's a very complex area. I think, if I think of the Microsoft days, and I'd say the main ethical problem I had was if somebody wasn't very good at their job, should we replace them or not? Because you can have really nice people who aren't that good at their job. In particular, it's particularly bad if you have the manager wasn't good and they weren't good. So they didn't get that much warning or guidance. And so do you owe it to them to wait until they have a good manager and then wait 2 years until you move them on to something else? And these things have a way of taking care of themselves. But that was the one part of my job at Microsoft I didn't really like, was deciding when to replace people. And you do end up with people around you who are better than that at you than you are. And you kind of feel unethical. You go tell them to do this thing. But I'm afraid I am guilty of doing that in some cases.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's take one more student question. Do we have one more student question? Levi.
Good morning, Mr. Gates. My name is Levi Bachmeyer, and I'm an education major. So I know you talked a lot about the structural changes that we can do here in America to improve the way that teachers are evaluated. What advice would you give to students like myself who are excited about entering the field of education to improve our educational outcomes?
Well, I think it's a great time to be getting involved in education reform, because there's really two things. There's the personnel system and how should that be done. And there are things like Teach for America, where you've seen students with a lot of energy and talent come in and in many cases have a huge impact. And in some systems, they're so recalcitrant that they get discouraged and it doesn't work. And it's very interesting to look at where those programs have worked, where they haven't worked. The idea that we're going to do good personnel systems and it's not going to be seniority based makes it a good field to go into, because a little bit the seniority thing, particularly with the cliff vesting that they do, you're basically underpaid for your first 15 years and then you're overpaid for about 5 years. And it's not a very fair system, particularly if you ever want to move from one place to another, because you don't have this sense of portability. And yet, a career in education now I think might involve doing a fair bit of teaching, then working on the software and curriculum and the personnel systems, then going back in, maybe in an administrative role, maybe going back to teaching. It's also a very exciting time because of the technology. And not that the technology, it's obvious how to use it. It's very important that we be a little more realistic. Every other time technology came along, people thought it would be a big deal. TV sets or computer-aided instruction. Now I think it really is a big deal. I mean, that you can have free video, that you can have peers that you learn with on a global basis and do projects with students anywhere in the world. But we have to bring a sense of measurement to this. And doing measurement in education is a very tough field. Just contributing to that alone would probably be the most seminal thing that could be done. There's so many biases that enter in to it. Very typically when you're doing a new program, you get the students who are more interested in doing better and the teachers who are more interested in doing better. So a lot of results in education are completely bogus simply because, if you said, hey, who wants to volunteer to do pink textbooks, the teachers and students who volunteered would prove to you that pink textbooks are so much better than any other type of textbook. And we even see this in charter schools. I love charter schools, but what's been important now is that we take not just the average student who's not in a charter versus the student who's in a charter, but we take the people who tried to get into the charter who didn't get in, which is sort of a random selection, and make that comparison. And what we see is a huge distribution between the students who did get into the charters. If they're good charters, they do super well. That is, you have four-year college attendance rates of like 86%. Then you have the student who tried to get in, who didn't get in, where you may see something like 35%. These are inner city numbers. And then you have the kids who didn't even try to get into the charter, who are at about 10%. So if you had thought that the kids applying to for the charter were the average kids, and because all they have to do, they just put their name down and they get entered into a lottery, just that one thing is very selective for their own mental model or their parents' mental model of what should go on. So, there's the amount that's not known in education is pretty severe, and it'll be great to get some of you pushing all of that forward.
Thank you. Let me do two things before we close. I have spoken about our Concordia students, and we're delighted to have them here. But it's important for everyone in the room to know that there are students here from our neighboring schools here in Minnesota and North Dakota. So I'd like the Concordia students to join me in recognizing the students here from Minnesota State, from North Dakota State, and from the University of North Dakota. Would you join me in... And the final thing, a personal word. I expect everyone sitting out in front of Bill and me understands what an enormous privilege it is to sit here and be part of this conversation with you this morning. And I have to say that what pleases me most as a college president is to see the way in which you are so much a learner, that you have thrown yourself in with perhaps a slightly moderated fanaticism, but thrown yourself in to this new world-changing work as you had into the magic of software. It's so clear to us here this morning that philanthropy is a matter of financial resources, but it's also a matter of generosity of mind and generosity of spirit. Bill Gates, thank you very much for coming here today to Concordia College. Thank you. Good job for you. Thank you so much.